So I'm Vlad from Neon Doctrine. I'm one of the co-founders. So we used to be another indie. We did a rebrand a few weeks ago. So now we have a new shiny logo and a new name. Um, we were a publisher based in Taiwan and China. So we work with Asian and Chinese games, bring them to the West, and also Western games to help them reach into the Chinese market. And we also handle the whole worldwide publishing. And so we started the studio about 7 years ago together in China, and then we moved one office to Taiwan, and now we're here. So today I'm going to talk to you about what can you do and what things you should watch out for if you want to release your game in the Chinese market, whether it's on local platforms or on Steam. So we don't have enough time for me to go into extra details on everything. So I'm just gonna give a basic breakdown on the whole situation we have right now with the government and the market in the region. And from there you can make your own decisions and contact me if you have more questions. Right. So why do you want to publish in China? Well, primarily because Chinese market right now is pretty much the biggest one when it comes to video games. So to give you an example, from our perspective, most of the games we release, right? So about 30%, 35% of our revenue we get from China. So if you're not preparing your launch to be successful and reach out to Chinese players, you are definitely losing out a chunk of revenue you could be getting from the region. Right. So what is the current situation in in China? So there's a lot of things we need to cover. So the first thing, if you want to publish on local platforms, right, you need a local publisher. So which means somebody needs to have a company physically present in China. So as a foreigner, you can't have it. So you need an actual Chinese partner or somebody who owns part of the company who's a local Chinese to have it. So the game needs to be copyrighted with the national administration with China, which means that you, as a developer, you will need to give your copyright license to the publisher or the partner you're working with in China. So they will have full ownership of your game's copyright in China. So that sounds like a scam. It's not a scam. It's just the government regulations that needs to be done in order to release on local platforms. You need to have an ICP operating license. That's something that your partner needs to take care of in the region. It pretty much allows them to publish the games and products in the region. You must conform to the NPPA law. So it's another red tape for the government that you yourself won't be able to handle, but that's why you would need a publisher in the region. Your game must conform to Protecting Minors and Game Operation Activity Acts. So this is a little thing that they recently implemented for both online and offline games. So there's a few things that you would need to put into your games before submitting for the government. Like I'm going to go through it later in the later slides. And you'll need to have an ISBN, which is the magical number. Think of like an ID number for your game that the government of China gives it. If you pass the censorship process, that's the number you will need to input in the backend of your Steam when you wish to release in Steam China. So right now, the whole situation, we have several platforms you can publish in China. You got Steam, you got PlayStation, you got Xbox, you got Switch, and you have mobile. So with Steam, you can still publish on Steam. It's still fine. It's a gray area right now, but you don't need to conform to any government things if you want to publish on Steam worldwide. And that Steam worldwide is still accessible to most of the players in China. However, with Steam China that came out in February, you will need the ISBN number that I mentioned before in order to publish on the platform. But right now it's in beta. There's only like 58 games right now. And still most of the Chinese players prefer regular Steam to Steam China. So all of the purchases still go through there. Now, PlayStation and Xbox are in the same situation that nobody really owns many of these consoles. So it's a very tiny market. Now, PlayStation 5 is coming out in China in about like 3 days. and we still don't know how they're going to do this storefront, right? Before with PlayStation, there was no Chinese store per se, so every time you would want to play any of the online games on your PlayStation, you needed to get like a special router, set up a special VPN so you could connect to like either Hong Kong or Japan or whatever other storefront and play online from there. So for PlayStation 5, they didn't still say anything how they're going to have it, if it's going to be region locked or not. So we'll find out in a few days. Xbox, unfortunately, almost non-existent. With Nintendo Switch, when it first came out, there was no Chinese store. About a year ago, they released one. So now, which the store only has like 5 games on it. And with Switch, what they did is they region locked it. So once you buy it in China, you get the Chinese version, and that's it. You can't swap stores. If you choose the Chinese store, then you can't play any of the other games. So what happens is most of the people still buy their Nintendo Switches from Hong Kong and Japan. So they use the Hong Kong or Japanese storefronts to buy their games, or sometimes American. So it's very hard for people to track where the sales are actually coming from China or not. And Mobile is very successful, but we're not going to be talking about mobile. I'm mostly going to be talking about PC and console. All right, so this ISBN number, right? How do you get it? So the short answer, 99% of the chance you won't be able to get it, right? So from the last year, the Chinese government only approved about 97 foreign games. And in the last quarter, only 33 got through the process. And out of those 33 games, I think only about like 3 or 4 of them were PC games and only 1 console games. Another thing that you need to keep in mind, right? If you're a multi-platform release, you need to go through all this government submission process to get the approval. And you need to do it for every single platform, right? So if you do it for PC, you still need to do it for PlayStation, you still need to do it for mobile, you still would need to do it for Xbox, you still need to do it for Switch. And it's not guaranteed that it will pass for every platform. Another thing to keep in mind, if you do it for mobile or Switch, you need to send a mobile device or a Nintendo Switch dev kit with your game build to China, which your publisher should handle that so they can test it. So you can't just send a build, you need to send the whole hardware thing. And the likelihood of you getting that back is very slim. So the whole process normally takes from 9 months to 2 years. So it's a long time to wait for it. And right now, we're still going through the backlog of games that were submitted in 2019, because at the end of 2019, the government shut down the submission process. So there was a big, stop. So none of the games were getting through. And for a year, it was just like a dam. So right now, they're checking out some new games, but most of the games that they are going through are still the games that were submitted like 2 years ago. Before the whole ban happened. Another thing to keep in mind, if somebody approaches you and be like, oh, don't worry, we'll get your game through in like 3 months. It's going to be on local platforms. Like, you just sign this paper and we'll get it done. That's probably a scam, because if Tencent can't get their games approved, some shady local publisher that you never heard of probably can't do it either. So just keep in mind about this, because I've seen too many indie developers getting scammed by these deals, when in reality, again, not much you can do right now if you want to publish on local platforms, right? So what preparation you want to do if you want to get this ISBN number for your game. So normally what it requires is a custom build from the developer. So the build needs to be fully localized in simplified Chinese, including in-game textures. So if you have like some drinks with some writing in English or whatever language, or there's like some graffiti on the wall in Russian or English or whatever, all of that thing needs to be done into simplified Chinese, not just the in-game text. Another thing is no other languages can be present in the game, only simplified Chinese. If there's online, and recently, like 2 weeks ago, they just added this clause. And also, if it's an offline game, you have to have a special API built in. That's the anti-addiction measures that connects to a Chinese server, where people that want to play the game, they need to log in with their country ID number. So if they're minors, it would lock them out after 10 p.m. So the minors can't play video games from 10 p.m. to like 8 a.m. and they only have, I think, 6 hours a day that they can play. So all of those prevention things will need to be present in the build that you submit. It doesn't matter if it's online or local multiplayer or whatever. Any game needs to have it now. If you have an in-game chat, they will give you a list of words that needs to be censored. So, if something gets typed in, certain words are not allowed to be to make an appearance. You'll need to have a business license, so that's another thing that the publisher needs to take care of. So they will need to have that, and you will need to prepare a 20,000 word document. So it's kind of like, you can think about it as a game development document, game design document, and of course it has to be in Chinese. So this is something that also, when you're working with the local publisher, they will need to help you get done. So, these are a list of guidelines. This is just more for a show of how strict and detailed these things are. So, you can't oppose the basic principles of the government. You can't damage national honors. You can't have hatred, ethnic discrimination. You can't destroy religious policy, promote cults, things like that. No spreading rumors. Can't have pornography, gambling, violence, murder, terror, blood. All of that stuff needs to be taken out of the game. A good example is when PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds came out, right? And it got their license. Instead of when you kill a person, instead of person actually dying, happy birthday balloons pop up. He waves to you, you wave to him, you bow to each other, and then he floats away into the sky. There's a lot of things you would need to change, especially if your game is very bloody and gory. There's a lot of things that will need to be corrected if you want to do this, right? Another fun thing, there's a lot of things that are banned that are not allowed to have. For example, time travel is banned. So if your game heavily relies on the time travel mechanic, there's a very high chance it won't get approved as well. So there you will get a huge list of things that you need to watch out when you're going to be making your build. So be prepared that just, if it's something that is a core mechanic of your game, more likely than not, you won't be able to release it then. So about 2 months ago, they released a new, they released a new 5-point grading system. So there's like 5 points. They will look at your game build and your game and determine if it's worth getting through the system or not. So one is the value orientation, or if the game design is original, how of a high quality is your production, what cultural content it has, and the stage of development. So this is just like a basic breakdown to give you an idea. And each one of them values 5 points, and if it's 2 points or less, then you fail. So you need to get at least 3 points in each category. So it's kind of like a mini exam for your game when you do the submission. Right, so it all seems very daunting. So technically, you have two options when it comes to China. You can either sign with a local publisher or partner, or you can self-publish. Like both of those work, but not for every type of the game, right? So that's something you need to talk with your partner and see if there's a possibility for your game to be released on local platforms. So if you sign with a local publisher, right, like I mentioned before, you need to give over the copyright for the region, but the publisher will handle all the GAPP and the special game build submissions, and it will do the government process for you. The publisher will do the localization support, including in-game assets, creating promo materials, trailers, screenshots, all of that. Publisher will also help you with submissions to local platforms like Tencent's WeGame or Cube or any other platform that pops up. They will also help you broker deal with streaming services, because right now that's a big boom in China, where you have a few companies that are looking for many games to sign for their online streaming services. And with that case, it's a bit easier because you don't really have to go through the government submission process. And of course, the publisher will handle all the PR and press and influencers and all of that, because none of those people speak English, of course. And all the platforms that we use to communicate them are very different. Instead of Twitter, you have Weibo. Instead of Facebook, you have Renren. Instead of any other social media, Discord, Guilded, they have their own BBS board and like Steam China special forums and things like that. That unless you speak Chinese or you're in the know, you won't have access to. So a publisher will help you with that as well. However, you can also go solo, which means that there is zero possibility for you to launch on local platforms. However, you can still release your game on Steam worldwide and do the promotion there. And you can also sell your game to key distribution platforms like Sankuo or any of the other ones that there are in China. There's a ton of them. They don't generate massive revenues, but if you're like a small developer team, it's still not small money. And you will have to handle all of your localization, including text and asset creation. However, you don't need to localize any of the textures in the game. For this, you can also hire an external PR company to help you out. And like I just mentioned before, it's going to be more difficult to reach out to press and influencers because of the culture and the language barrier, and the platforms that people use. Right. So what can you prepare for the Steam release? You need to make sure you have a very good localization, right? I'm not talking about just throwing your text and going through Google Translate and, like job's done, right? No, you have to have you hire a company or see if in your community you have some Chinese gamers, and you can ask them to help you out with the localization, because this is very important here. Chinese players are very nitpicky when it comes to good localization, so you have to make sure that is done correctly and properly. You need to prepare of course, Chinese marketing assets, so you have to make sure the screenshots have Chinese language, you have like clips with Chinese, you have at least one trailer that's in simplified Chinese, or if there's talking in your trailer or voice acting, you don't have to dub it because it's not cheap, but at least have some subtitles so the Chinese player base can understand what's going on. And I can't stress this enough, make sure you localize your Steam page into simplified Chinese, because there's so many developers that don't do that, and Chinese players get really pissed off about it. So this is one thing you also have to keep in mind. You have to have a good localization of your game, but also the Steam store page. Another very important thing when it comes to China is you need to take care of the Chinese reviews that you get, right? Doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. Make sure you reply to them and be nice and courteous, or hire someone to do it for you, because again, everything's going to be in Chinese, right? Now, one thing why it's important is because right now the situation with Steam is the storefront and the ability to buy games and play games is open, but the whole community side of Steam, like your discussions or the workshop part, all of that is banned in China. So even if players use the VPN, they can't get into Steam forums and Steam discussions. So the only way Chinese gamers can report, game-breaking bugs or some general feedback or communicate with the developer in any way is through the review system. That's why a lot of games that have the Chinese localization and the puts in China, when they release their game, in the first 12, 24 hours, they see a massive influx of negative reviews from China. Most of the time it's because this is the only way the players can talk to the developers in case something is broken or there's something they don't like. So make sure you really tend to those negative reviews, because that's your only line of communication with the players, unless you have the Chinese community set up like YouTube, Google, or whatever. But normally not many people do, so that's one way to make sure you stay in touch with the players from China. Another thing that's important is having a keyboard and mouse support. I actually have to tell the opposite to the developers in Asia, because they don't want to put controller support. But for the Western developers, having a keyboard and mouse support for your game is important, because a lot of players in China still use keyboard and mouse when they play games. It doesn't matter if it's a racing game, if it's a fighting game, if it's like a Dark Souls type of game. A lot of the people use keyboard and mouse, and if you don't have that, you will get a lot of angry players putting a lot of negative reviews saying, where's my keyboard and mouse support? Why don't you have it in the game? So yeah, that's the short version of this whole situation. We're almost out of time, so here's my Twitter, here's my Discord, and here's my email. So if you guys have any questions after this, you can always message me on any of these things. Or if you go to our website, you can also set up a call with me, and we can go into more detail about the whole situation, because there's actually a lot of things we can cover. But again, like I said, we didn't have much time for this, so I just tried to give you a general overview of the whole situation right now. I know it looks a little bit daunting, but the market is so volatile and it changes constantly. Like, I had to change this presentation 4 times after I submitted to DevGAMM, because things keep changing and the news keeps popping out. But yeah, I hope this was helpful for you. And Yeah, like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to message me. Можно даже и по-русски, так что без проблем, или
Yeah,
по-украински,
and you
без
can
разницы,
speak
нема питань.
Russian or Ukrainian to me. I use them.
Yeah, so that's it from my presentation, and I guess now we can go into the QA.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you, Vlad, for your thorough overview of game publishing in China. I'd like to ask all our viewers in the chat to send us their questions because I think it's a very confusing area probably especially for people who do not deal with China like on the day-to-day basis, and we have
it's a whole different world out there.
Yeah, I can imagine. And actually that's what I wanted to ask you about. You said a lot about how to localize a game to the market, what to tweak in order for the game that is already developed was interesting for the Chinese players. But if I'm just starting, for example, producing ideas for my project, I'd like to publish it eventually in China, like it's my main focus, Chinese market, for example. What can I do development-wise in order to for my project to be more interesting for Chinese players and to kind of make my life easier in the future? So I would think about it during the development and not after it.
I mean, if we're talking about technical aspects, make sure you have a really good localization system in place and make sure you have enough space in your text boxes or whatever text appears to include the Chinese characters, especially if you're developing a pixel art game or there's pixel fonts present, because a lot of the times those have limited spots. And when it comes to more complicated characters in Chinese, even simplified Chinese, there's just not enough space to write the whole thing out, and it just becomes a blobby mess that nobody can read. So you have to make sure that you have a good font selected and you have enough space to actually put it into the game and it makes sense. When it comes to actual game playing mechanics and types of games you want, replayability is one of the major things the Chinese players like. So, your online multiplayer games, your roguelike games, your visual novels, those are the ones that are really, really popular with the Chinese crowd. So the more replayability the game has, the better it is. The Chinese players always value the amount of time they can spend playing the game for the money they paid. And another thing I forgot to mention is to keep in mind, if when you're releasing a game, make sure if you want to do China, make sure you do it at the same time, because we have so many developers coming to us and being like, oh, I released my game a year ago and now I want to push in China. I'm like, well, sorry, it's too late because the game's too old. It's a year old. Press and influencers don't care because it's an old game, and Chinese players won't like it because you're treating them as a secondary afterthought market. So the likeliness of having a success after you already release your game and then you try to push to China is very low.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And we have another question from Alexander Belimov. Any examples of the games in Steam which handled the publishing in China properly?
On top of my head, I mean, hey, you can go to our catalog and look at all of our games. They did it right. Okay, so the recent releases from Devolver Digital, like for example, like Loop Hero, they did a really good thing with China because the company started establishing their Chinese presence about like a year and a half ago. Starting to push the social media, doing the proper localization, reaching out to the press and media there. So they're doing a really good job with their titles. Man, right now on the top of my head, nothing else really come. Frogwares, the people behind, they're actually from in Ukraine. They're behind the Sherlock Holmes series and the recently Sinking City. They did a really good job with China as well. No More Robots. a few of the recent titles, they also stepped up their game when it comes to Chinese region. So they did the proper localization, and their Steam pages are nice, and they try to communicate with their Chinese communities when it comes to negative reviews, like I mentioned. So recently, actually, quite a few mid-sized publishers are doing a pretty good job. Yeah, it's easy to check. You just go there and look at the reviews, select the Chinese language, and then you can see how many reviews are there, positive, negative, how many of them are being responded to, and are they well taken care of, and then you can kind of estimate how the game is doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Thank you for answering the questions, and thank you for the talk once more.